Nice job, Bob. Well, we just want to make sure we're recording too. Okay, thank you very much, Barry. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Superintendent Daryl McCall. So glad you've been able to join us this afternoon. With me today, I have my Deputy Superintendent, Bob Berlow. Hi, Bob.
Hello, everybody.
We have Brendan Keenan, the Director of SEL.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And I also have Barry Sklar, who is the WRSD symbol right there, and Rebecca Peterson, who is the Administrative Assistant to the Superintendent in the School Committee. She's also part of this meeting, but we'll be doing most of the conversation today. So first and foremost, thank you and welcome. I know this has been probably one of the most challenging times in your lives. I know it has been for us here in this school district and school districts throughout the Commonwealth and throughout the country. And, more importantly, it's really, when we're looking at the pandemic in general, what we're trying to do is really provide some sense of normalcy for the children who attend our school system. We want to ensure that what we're doing with kids on a regular basis really gives them kind of some continuity, some consistency, some sense of normalcy that might not be happening in their everyday lives right now. So you think about Halloween and trick-or-treating, how that kind of plays out versus how it has played out in the past. All these different things that are changing, right in front of our eyes. And, I understand we live history every day. Every day that happens, something historical happens. But this is a once-in-a-lifetime situation. And it has really given us opportunities to kind of stretch our imaginations around how we kind of work through educating our students, how we work with our staff, how we work with our families on a constant basis. So I have to say, over the past, several months since mid-March, we've had, the opportunity to really hear from parents, hear from students, just about things that have worked out well. I can tell you last spring, we jumped into a model of kind of remote teaching, let's say, that was it was something that was knee-jerk that everyone had to do. We did not have time to plan. We did not have time to think about it. Our teachers literally moved from one mode of teaching where they were used to the in-person connection that happened on a daily basis to, Google Meet and, trying to teach their classrooms remotely and posting online classes and having learning boards and all of the types of things that, take time and months and effort and funds to really put together. So over the past several months, we've been working as a district to not only pull together those aspects of what we want to do when kids come back into the building, but also looking at ensuring that our buildings are ready to go and they're safe, and we have the capacity to house our staff of over 1,000 people, as well as our students. And even if we're bringing back half the number of students that we have on a typical basis, that's still larger than many districts around us. So it's still 3,600 students. So with that being said, just wanted to thank you all, welcome you all today. What we're going to talk about today will be basically questions and answers that we've put together. Many of the questions that have come in, and I want to first thank all of you for the questions that have come in over the past several weeks, and the many that we've received over the past 24 hours from parents specifically about, how is remote going to work? What's going to happen with hybrid? How is transportation going to work for my child? Will my child be able to work with a particular teacher? Can we have cohorts stay together? All of those types of things. We greatly appreciate those questions. And those are things that we are going to attempt to answer today. We'll also have another kind of Q&A session, town hall tomorrow morning, to go through more of these items. And again, there are many questions that have been posed that are really school-based questions. And, we can't necessarily go into specifics about how lunch will work at Central Tree, or how a student's going to, enter and exit the building at Davis Hill. But we can talk in generalities about how that might work. So, as we kind of go forward, please know that, everything that we talk about today is really based upon the plan that we've put out there. We are still in the process of negotiations with our teachers union. And, as we look at, this proposition that we're putting forth, please remember that we're still talking with our teachers about what we're doing as a district moving forward. So that's something I just wanted to make sure that people understood, and we're all on the same page with. So, Bob, anything that you want to add in terms of starting off?
I think that's a great introduction, Daryl. Maybe you could share your screen, and we'll jump into some of the questions that we've pulled from people's emails and go through some of the answers for folks.
Great. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, if you're familiar with, if you have kids and you've been watching what's going on at home, when a teacher presents a screen, this is what they're doing. They're presenting it. So I will present my screen, and that will also have the PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to be sharing with every unit. I just want to make sure that that is working. So Bob, is that all set?
Yeah, I can see it, Daryl. Maybe before we begin, you could let people know how might they be able to access this PowerPoint after we're done.
Sure. Yeah. So what we're going to do is that we will post this directly to WRSD.net. So you'll be able to access this. So right now we are streaming live, but we're also recording this town hall. So you can access it at any time. If you have more questions about some of the things that we talk about today, please feel free to reach out. I can tell you we're working at responding to the questions as quickly as possible. But again, so many questions continue to come in about specific schools that we will, we're still trying to talk at a 40,000 foot level in certain places.
And this slideshow, Daryl, we'll be sharing this as well. Is that true?
That is true, Bob. So this not only will the presentation, there'll be a link to the presentation in terms of the tape, but we'll also send out a link directly to the slideshow, because within the slideshow we have embedded links that you will be able to click on to go to more information.
Awesome.
Thank you. Okay. So, again, welcoming remarks, I did kind of go through that already. I do want to say that we have just a great team behind us in terms of what we've been doing over the past, 7-8 months. People at central office have been working tirelessly. Our building principals have been working tirelessly, our administrators as well that support them. And we also have our teachers who, again, starting in March, had to flip on a dime and change how they actually taught kids. So having that in play, as well as having the opportunity for us to, really support kids' learning and support what they're doing on a daily basis is, what we're really looking for. So I'd like to move on to our, questions and answers. So what's nice about this is that we've broken it up into 6 different categories, and we tried to group our categories, around consistent themes. So we have one theme of teaching and learning. We have another theme of health and safety. We have our COVID-19 guidelines. We have technology, routines, and also logistics. And I'll talk a little bit about each one. So within teaching and learning, those are really the questions associated with what's going on within the classroom in terms of the prospects associated with hybrid, remote. What will my child be doing during certain times? What might a schedule look like? Under health and safety, those are the questions that really pertain to what's happening in the schools. What protocols and safety procedures have been put in place, and are we putting in place? COVID-19 guidelines. Those are the guidelines that are provided to us via the state, DPH, CDC, and we'll review some of those. We also have technology, and technology is the the linchpin for what we've been doing over the past several weeks, and what we will continue to have to do moving forward. We also are talking about routines, in terms of the consistent kind of routines that will be taking place throughout our time here in school this year. And then logistics, some logistics associated with the details of moving forward as a district through the pandemic and also through this school year. So under teaching and learning.
Yeah, here's our first question, Daryl. So are we really going into hybrid? We heard this from many people wondering about this.
Yeah, so in terms of going into hybrid, yeah, we're going into hybrid. So hybrid's already begun for some of the most vulnerable students. We started bringing some of our high needs students in special education back in early October, so October 5th, in fact, and we're increasing the time that those students are in school incrementally. So by the 26th, which is on Monday, they're going to increase the number of hours that they're actually in school, and we'll also increase the small number of students who are also coming back. Our goal is to bring in our students for in-person learning for the hybrid model on the 18th of November, which is the start of the second quarter. We had originally planned on bringing students back in January when we did our initial presentation and what was shared with DESE back in August. And as we looked at the dates, as we worked with school committee, we looked at bringing students back a little earlier. And this is basically shaving off six to 7 weeks of time where students would have been continuing on the remote pathway. So the plan is to go hybrid. Much of what we have to continually think about and talk about are just the metrics associated with safely bringing students back, and what we're responsible for, and what we're looking at in terms of what we want to do to ensure that it's safe for kids to come back, it's safe for staff to be in buildings.
And the next question relates to that as well, Daryl. So if we're coming back on the 18th, some are wondering, why are we coming back then and getting a few days in, and then when we have this Thanksgiving break, wouldn't it make more sense to come back after the Thanksgiving break?
Right. So when we're looking at that time frame, first and foremost, our goal is to get students back in school. Our goal is to have in-person learning, students in classrooms with their peers, with their classroom teachers. That's really our goal. That's also the goal of Governor Baker. That's the goal of Commissioner Riley, who's the Commissioner of Education. And that has been shared with superintendents really time and time again over the past 6-7 months. Superintendents meet with Commissioner Riley either weekly or bi-weekly. And we continue to hear from the commissioner that the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education is very much interested in making sure that we have the opportunity for students to be back in front of teachers in person. So back in schools, back with their peers, back into some type of routine. Again, remote learning works for many students. In the same way that in-person learning works for people, but there are times when remote learning doesn't necessarily work for certain students, and they can be in jeopardy of major kind of regression. They can be in jeopardy of health issues and many other things that come up that, again, we're not in the household with those students, and we can't necessarily monitor what's happening day in and day out when students are home all the time. So when we're thinking about what we're able to do in a school, we're able to be in a controlled environment. And in fact, today, there was a memo that was shared with school districts, with superintendents in particular, around some school districts, and you might have heard about some over the past week or two, and a few more this week. Some school districts have proactively been going to remote or saying they're moving to a remote model the week before Thanksgiving, all the way through the December break, well into January, so that they will not put themselves in a situation where they might have a cluster of cases that come through because of people traveling during Thanksgiving break, or students coming back from university or college to be home with their families. So that has gone out. DESE is basically saying that they don't support districts doing this. And you might have also heard that 16 districts in the Commonwealth who had put forth a plan around remote learning had actually received a letter from the commissioner asking them to tell them why they're not sending kids in person, why they're not going through the process of bringing students back to school. So that's that audit piece that I mentioned here in the response. The second part of this response is really around the quarter. So we're going to end our first quarter right before we begin this. So that second quarter starting date, the 18th of November, puts us in a situation where kids can start anew. So we're starting fresh. It gives us the opportunity, if we move to a model where a student might have to switch teachers for whatever reason, it's a clean switch, it's a clean break.
Thank you, Daryl. So I guess if we understand that, hybrid's going to happen, we're starting up on the 18th. Does that mean then that in January we're going to go back to full in person?
So again, that's a question that will have to really come down to decisions that would be made at a level above a school district. So right now, school districts are bound by regulations associated with transportation and with social distancing. And when we've looked at, and I've shared this in documentation over the past couple of months, when we look at our busing, our largest bus, we're able to handle about 24 students now instead of 72. So you can basically fit a third of the number of students on a bus for transportation. When we're talking about spacing, social distancing within classrooms and within schools, we're looking at providing ample space for students of between 3 feet and 6 feet between desks. Anytime where kids are together, they're not sitting right next to each other or right on top of one another, as they typically would, where all the classrooms are separated, desks are facing all the same way. And again, we have to be able to provide that opportunity for that number of students to be in a classroom. That limits the number of students we can bring in at a time. At one time. So, for example, if we were to, we have our high school has 2,000 students. If we wanted to socially distance, we would basically need a school twice as big as a high school in order to fit all of our students in there. The same thing goes for most of our schools. We don't have the capacity to socially distance. Our classrooms aren't large enough to have that type of spacing with the number of students for a typical classroom. So between 18 and 25, let's say, for a typical classroom, we couldn't do it with the spacing requirements. So again, that makes it difficult for us to do that. We also don't know the trajectory of COVID and where it's going to be in January. We know, and I spend an awful lot of time reading and watching the news in reference to our trajectory here in Massachusetts and even locally in Central Mass. On Monday and on a bi-weekly basis, I meet with our local boards of health, so all 5 boards of health, as well as our school nurses. And we've had the opportunity to kind of talk through how we're doing as a community, what we're seeing for COVID numbers, in Paxton or Rutland and Princeton, and, how that might play out in terms of our decision to switch from a remote to a hybrid or back to a remote, however that would necessarily play out. So when we're looking at this, some of our direction will still be coming from the state, but I can tell you that the state continues to push back even around districts that are in a red zone. And right now we do not have any towns that have been considered red. We as of last week, and it'll get updated this week, we had 2 towns that were yellow, Holden and Paxton, and those could change one way or the other on a weekly basis. So again, as we think about going back full time in January, that's really up to the state. if they relax some of their guidelines around transportation and social distancing, then it would happen, or it could happen. But it's not very likely at this time based upon the current trajectory of COVID.
So in other words, Daryl, we would have to have all those requirements removed before we could bring everybody back in person due to all those restrictions of space you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really it, Bob. When we're looking at what we could do to possibly bring them back, those restrictions limit the numbers of students that we can have in classes and transport back and forth safely on buses.
Yep. Okay, well, if that's the case and we're coming back, then help us to understand a little bit. So kids are going to be coming back, and there's all this mentioned, and we hear these words a lot: asynchronous learning, synchronous learning. What's the difference between these two?
Sure. So that's, again, this is a great question. This is something that we've been talking about since last March, and when we first started talking about the concept of online learning and online kind of teaching and so forth, we spent time trying to define synchronous versus asynchronous. And as the slide really talks about, synchronous learning really is a teacher interacting directly with a set of students, in the same way that they typically would if they were in person. So right now, if there is an online class, so for remote learning, and students are home, when the teacher brings up their Google Classroom and they're speaking with one another and students are watching something live, that's a synchronous version of what learning is. And again, that is, as this mentioned, it could be the same physical space. So it could be when students are in front of a teacher in a classroom, but it could also be during a Google meeting. So, this right now, this is if you're watching it live, and Bob and I are doing this synchronously. Asynchronous is different in the sense that we have teachers providing material. It could be something that's taped, so that the teacher has a lesson that they've taped beforehand that they post that students can then watch at a later time. It can be links to video clips. It could be other resources, associated with some of the online learning modalities that we have right now. It's not a teacher coming back, communicating back and forth via a live feed. It could be something that happens through email, so teachers can then post something, students can write back and forth. But again, this is really more around direct teaching and direct instruction, and asynchronous is posting assignments, materials that are done in the same way that would be done without a person directly in front of them leading the experience.
And I think what we'd also want parents to understand, and students as well, there could be opportunities for them to experience synchronous and asynchronous, whether they're in person or whether they're at home doing this remotely. So in a typical lesson, there could be both of those opportunities.
Exactly. So when we have there, I know there are certain classes that when teachers are actually doing the lesson, they might have a synchronous lesson and then say, okay, you know what, you're now going to go off and do the assignment that you're working on, and then we'll come back later on and revisit what you've done. In the same way a teacher, and then they might do a break-off session with a small group. In the same way that would happen in a classroom where a teacher would do their mini lesson, students would do their assignment, the teacher would work with a small group or circulate, and then come back and close off the assignment and summarize. So the same thing happens with an online version of this, and you can go back between synchronous and asynchronous learning.
Perfect. So Daryl, help us to understand a little bit now. So we have this cohort A and cohort B. Cohort A would be maybe kids are in person that day, and cohort B, maybe the kids are remote. Who supports these different cohorts? How does that work?
Sure. So when we're talking about the different cohorts moving forward, so the hybrid model that was shared with families Monday night really talked about an A and a B model. So we have two cohorts because, again, as we mentioned earlier, we do not have enough space, nor do we have enough room on buses to bring all of our students back safely. So we have to divide our students up into cohorts. What we're looking at for our model is cohort A will be in school all day, Monday, Tuesday. While they're in school, cohort B, the other half of the class, will be remote for the day. What will happen is the classroom teacher or subject area teacher, they'll support the direct instruction associated with A, but at the same time provide some type of support for B in terms of asynchronous learning, in terms of assignments, in terms of projects. All of that will then also be part of what they're doing. When we're looking at what an example of perhaps an elementary day might look like for let's say a grade 2 classroom, you might have the teacher bring together the students from A who are in person and the students from B who are home together at the same time for an opening meeting. If it's Houghton, they do responsive classroom, so that might be something that they work on. There's also that time when the teacher is taking attendance for the class, because in a different way than in the spring, we're required to take attendance for students regardless of whether or not they're in person or they're remote. So that has to happen. When we're looking at what the other type of support that can occur, we have our English language learning support for students. We have paraprofessionals. We have other service providers, including our special ed teachers, who can also then provide support to those students who are B during that time. So if they're home during that day, they're remote, then they get that type of support during that time. So students who are in the remote only path, and that's the cohort C, so they're going to be supported by their assigned remote teacher. And again, when we're talking about the remote teacher, that could be that person that they're currently working with. It could be another teacher, but when we're thinking about it, it's really going to be ultimately support from a staff member from Wachusett. And that's one of the things that we want to stress. We want to make sure that we have, our students, having the capacity to work with teachers who are part of the district.
Thank you, Daryl. Let's move on. So will my child have to, when my child has face-to-face interactions on those days that they're home, will my child have face-to-face interactions on the days that they're home in the hybrid model?
So it's, and again, this is, we're leaving this a little open as we, move forward, but the goal is to have some face-to-face teaching associated with the hybrid model. So as I said a little earlier, the goal would be to have the capacity for that teacher to have a time to check in with the student at the beginning of the day, end of the day, maybe middle of the day, at the middle and high school level. There is some type of attendance that occurs, and whether or not that occurs with the direct teaching associated with a student, checking in, and a teacher is saying, okay, you're here, here's what you're going to do today, or whether or not it's a teacher posting an assignment, and then they know that student has received the assignment and has been in there because they've gone in and they've checked off. So those are things that we will be doing. But ultimately, it's really subject dependent. It's time of the day, as I mentioned, morning, afternoon, and the day of the week, depending upon where they're at.
Daryl, speaking of day of the week, could you tell us a little bit about Wednesday and how that works? And is that a day that my kid, if they're home, is going to receive support from the teacher?
Sure. So the Wednesday, so the way it's broken down, and I think maybe tomorrow I'll put a chart up so we can talk through it a little easier. But sure. Currently, right now, we have our AA BB model, with Wednesday being the day when both A and B are remote for the morning. So when students are remote for that morning, the teacher will be assigning, will have synchronous and asynchronous assignments for their students on that day. So during that morning, it could look like a typical morning looks like now, where students are learning remotely, they're learning from home, they're connecting with their classmates remotely, and the teacher is posting assignments, working synchronously with students, working in small groups, but also maybe doing, putting something else out there for students in terms of some asynchronous work that they might be responsible for doing, and then sharing again. When, one thing that I forgot to mention a little earlier was when we have students who are in A and they're in person, one of the things we're trying to look at is just the capacity of students to always be online. And there is some concern associated with screen time for kids and with staff. But
Yeah.
again, we want to ensure that there might be take-home packets that go home with students when they leave Tuesday afternoon and they're going to be back the following Monday. They've got a packet that aligns with what's going on the following next couple of days with the other students who are coming in. That way, there's a level of continuity associated with the curriculum from the A and the B, and even the combination of both on Wednesdays.
Thank you. This kind of ties into our next question here, and that's to get you to maybe help us to understand a little bit. If I sign up for the hybrid model and I'm in there, is my kid doing the same thing when they're in school versus the kids that are remote, and how's that going to work?
Yeah, so when we're talking about the A and the B groups, ultimately in terms of them being remote or they're in person, we will make sure that they have the resources and ultimately the kind of experience associated with the learning. So in order for them to get through the curriculum, as Bob and I have been talking about this at length over the past several months, in terms of the concept of remote learning. And then ultimately hybrid, and how hybrid would play out, over the period of X number of months, whether or not it be a short term and we have to go back to remote, or whether or not hybrid is the model that is used for the remainder of the year. So again, the goal is to continue to have a continuum associated with the curriculum for students that are not only online, but the ones that are teacher taught moving forward.
Thank you. Let's move on to the next one here, and this is more about maybe the structure of learning. So in our reopening plan, and this is the plan we put out prior to the hybrid model being detailed and explored right now. In that, the afternoon is designated as small group and individual directed learning. When we move into hybrid, what's this going to look like? Is it the same? Is it different? Do the expectations change? Is it going to be different by my child's teacher?
So this was a question that has been posed a few times as we've kind of looked through questions over the past couple of weeks, and as we kind of look at what we've done and versus where we're going, the schedules of the reopening plan are basically the current remote only phase. It's the same type of thing. So when we're looking at the hybrid learning schedules, again, they don't have the same small group and individual learning blocks of time, and they look more like a in-person class. So, in terms of a traditional student schedule. So the way it's broken down currently, those afternoon blocks, they're not following the same amount of direct instruction. There's support time built into the afternoons right now. As well as other times where teachers can touch base with small groups of kids. We will, in this next step, when we transition to hybrid, those days will look more like a typical day for a student, and one that it looked like a year ago at this time. So there will be times assigned to for art, music, PE, specials, math, language arts, social studies. At the middle school and high school level, you'll have your assigned courses moving through the day. In terms of, I think one of the questions, would expectations be different based upon my child's teacher expectations? We're really looking to have, some continuity associated with teachers from school to school. But I think, as people know, we have a large district, and one of the things that we've been working on for many years is developing a continuum associated with the curriculum from building to building, so that as students leave their elementary schools, their middle schools, and they move on to the high school, they've had the capacity or the opportunity for very similar structures in terms of the curriculum. Teachers are all unique people, and the expectation isn't that teaching looks the same from one classroom to the other.
Right.
But the consistency associated with what is taught and the power standards, those are really the things that we focus on as a district, so that we have continuity from Paxton to Rutland to Holden to Princeton to Sterling across the board. And Bob, I know this is an area that's passionate for you. I don't know if you wanted to say anything else.
Yes, we use the state curriculum framework, and from that we've identified absolute gotta haves in the curriculum, as opposed to nice to haves, and we're making sure that all students are being taught and are measured their progress towards mastering these got to have standards. And Daryl referred to them as mastery standards. Power standards is another term that's used there as well. This is how we're doing it. Everybody across the district's using those standards and working towards having students at a particular grade level master those in the different content areas. And that's something that we've used to unify us. And those are still in place, even though we're remote, and now we're going to hybrid, and eventually we'll get back to school as normal. But that's our roadmap. Those are our destinations. Those are our stops. And nothing's changed from the way it was before COVID. We're still using those as what's guiding us. Good question, Daryl. Thanks for asking me.
No, and again, thank you, Bob, for kind of expounding upon that, because ultimately, we want to ensure that we know this is going to be a different year. We've been saying that. I think teachers have been speaking with us about that. We want to ensure that we're providing as much consistency in terms of the curriculum as possible, and having those power standards really allows us and allows staff to support students, in terms of having a continuum associated with the curriculum from building to building.
Perfect. So Daryl, you've told us a lot about these different models here so far, and I know I want to be able to make a choice here, but what if I make the choice and it just isn't working out? Can I change my mind after the fact? And if I do, how quick or how much time is needed for that to be enacted then? Can you help us to understand that a little bit?
Yeah. And again, that's a question that we're fielding many questions associated with that. And I think, rightly so. Ultimately, parents want to ensure that whatever decision they make for their child, A, their kids are safe, and B, they're going to be able to have a learning opportunity or learning opportunities that really fulfill what they need. So in reference to the question, yes, parents can change their mind in terms of having students participate in hybrid or remote. That's not an issue in terms of the remote only pathway. Again, we required a period of commitment from families because, again, we want to ensure that we have some continuity there for people. There are times when we know that in-person learning might be better. And if they're in the remote pathway and they really want to come back to in-person learning, one of the things that we have to take into consideration is that we have spacing constraints in classrooms, and we have busing and transportation constraints. So we have to take that into consideration as we think about students transitioning back in. So, for example, if you're a parent of a remote student and they're a 7th grader at Mount View, and you say, you call up Mr. Githmark and say, you know what, Eric, we'd really like to bring our student back in next week. It's not going to happen next week. It's going to take a few weeks in order for that to happen. And that's based upon us being able to adequately move students safely within the building. We are bound by constraints associated with social distancing, and we need to ensure that we have the capacity to do that. So schedules are more challenging when we're putting students back into classes. Busing is more challenging. So those are all things that we have to take into consideration. And again, and that's what we mentioned at the end, there's a waiting period. If it's something that can happen quickly because the constraints aren't really there, we will do it. But please know that there's a strong likelihood that it will take many days in order for this to occur.
Thank you. Daryl, the next one we sort of answered, but I think this one gets beyond just the curriculum. It's talking about teaching. So the question is the curriculum being taught the same now as in previous years?
Yeah. So again, Bob, you did talk a little bit about this earlier. So we're really working under the same curricular goals that we've had in place and have been what we've been doing over the past several years. What people need to understand is some of the lessons are probably going to look different. The pacing is probably going to be a little different. The strategies that are used are most likely going to be different because, again, the teacher was typically able to do a full in-person lesson for students up until last March. So much of that has to get modified as we move forward. But again, we want to look at that end goal, and that end goal is really ensuring that we're following that power standard, and we're getting to the point where those kids have a solid understanding of what we're looking for. When we're looking at what we're doing as a district, we need to ensure that anything that was lost last spring, so the learning gaps associated with kind of the COVID-19 pandemic and this unprecedented shutting down of schools throughout the entire country, one of the things that we're really looking to do is figure out how we can better meet the needs of students either remotely or in person this year, so that we try to meet those gaps, mitigate some of the distance that happened in terms of the learning, and then really bring them back to a point where we're all in the same place in terms of continuity and consistency. Students are all at a different academic level. No one's at the same level ever. But at the same time, we want to ensure that the growth that's happening is continuous and constant for students. The other part that we mentioned here is also that social emotional learning piece, and that's a big part of what Director Keenan, Brendan, who's on this call as well, has been focusing on, and he's been spending time talking with our guidance counselors, our counselors throughout the schools, our school nurses, around many of the items that are really important for us to continue to support around social emotional learning for students, either in person or remote, because they're both very, very, very important. And Brendan, I wasn't sure if you wanted to add anything in with that.
So I think you covered it, Daryl, and that will be, something that we'll continue to look at. And I'm glad to be able to oversee those groups that really lead the work in the schools, and the innovativeness that they've come up with. It's pretty unbelievable, like how they've adapted to the circumstances. So, I see that as continuing in that direction.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, and I have to say, the work that the teachers have done over the past several weeks has been nothing but phenomenal in terms of the effort and energy that they're putting out there to help support kids academically, socially, emotionally. It's just, I've heard so many great stories from families about the effort that is really being put in place by teachers. Some teachers have 120 kids that they see, every single day. That's a lot of kids to see online. Some teachers have 20 kids that they're, 26 6-year-olds that they're working with. That's a lot. And we understand that it's a lot. So, and I know many of you who have kids at home and you're watching what's going on in the day, and you see the effort that's being really put out there by these teachers, and I cannot commend them enough.
So Daryl, if I could summarize this, I think parents should expect that we have the same goals, the same curriculum we're working under, but the strategies we're using to teach kids, I think they should expect to see some differences than they've seen in the past, because number one, the kids might have different needs, as you mentioned. There's some problems maybe that they didn't master to a certain level last spring, or something else. Maybe there's social emotional needs that have cropped up, but also due to the fact that we're teaching kids now that aren't necessarily in front of us, so we need different strategies to engage them while they're remote. So parents should expect to see different methods being used while their children are being taught this year.
Yep, perfect, Bob. Yep, exactly.
Let's check that next question out and see where we're. So this question, Daryl, okay, my kid's in school, and are the grades going to happen the same as in the past? What's going on in that world?
Yeah, so again, grading practices are probably going to be similar to they are similar to what's been used in the past prior to the pandemic. So we have standard grading procedures. Teachers have rubrics. Report cards will be going out. Progress reports will be going out, based upon standard timeframes. And again, this is something that is across the board throughout the district and also throughout the Commonwealth. School districts are, ensuring that kids are being graded that reports are being great or are being produced, rubrics are being produced. Students are able to kind of gauge where they're at in order to move forward. So again, that's something that will continue. In terms of parent-teacher conferences, those will take place remotely this year. They will take place. We are looking at the possibility of perhaps expanding that in terms of giving more opportunities for some of the upper grade levels to have more conversations with their teachers at that level. I do know that with remote learning, parents have been very happy with the communication that's been going back and forth between school and home, and that's typically the direct communication between me as a parent and someone else as the teacher. So again, we are very pleased with the ability of the teachers, the turnaround time, and what they're able to communicate. But having those conferences to kind of summarize how learning is going for students. Remember, we started the school year late. We didn't start until September 16th, so everything gets pushed back a little bit. On top of the fact that from March to June, the learning that occurred was not a typical year, and those weren't typical months in terms of really accessing the curriculum, coverage of the curriculum, meeting power standards that we've already talked about. So, we have to look at this and really kind of modify what we're looking at in terms of the amount of growth, anticipated for a student from one year to the other.
Thank you, Daryl. And speaking of assessments and everything, that leads us to our next question. Is there going to be MCAS this year? What's going on there?
Yeah, so a lot of questions about this. I know in my superintendent forums when we speak, there's been pushback around students having to be responsible for MCAS and schools ultimately responsible for MCAS. That is something that DESE has not deviated from at this point in time. So the expectation is that students will be taking the MCAS this spring. With that being said, the reason why states have to do this type of assessment is because the federal government requires something like an MCAS in each state in order to receive federal funds. There has to be that assessment. Unless there is a relaxing of that at the federal level and there's a waiver, which is what happened last spring, the state just can't say, okay, you know what, we're not going to do the MCAS. Again, it would have to go through the legislature. It's a pretty long, arduous process. And considering the fact that we don't even have a state budget yet, I don't foresee the MCAS item going onto the docket to be discussed anytime too soon.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
We've got some questions now specific to the hybrid model, and a couple of them here. Daryl, am I going to have the same teacher if I'm in the hybrid model that I do now? Can I choose cohort A or B, which one I want to be on? Because maybe my friends are on one versus the other. Will my schedule change from what it is now if I just signed up for hybrid? And can siblings be together? If I'm a parent and I got a couple kids, can they all be on the same cohort?
Yeah, so we've had a lot of questions about the hybrid model and the concept of cohorts. So, first and foremost, for a hybrid model, for those students who are currently remote, as all students are, and they say, you know what, we want to be in the hybrid model, you're still scheduled to have that same teacher who is with you right now. In terms of choosing a cohort, parents can request changes to the cohort. Just please know that we might not be able to honor that request in particular because of either one cohort having more students than another. We have to balance things off by numbers. So we balance off transportation, we balance off class size. Please know that numbers will not come out perfectly equal when we divide up our classes. There will be some places where a cohort A, if you're talking about a fourth grade class, cohort A might have 10 kids, while cohort B might have 13 kids because of how transportation breaks down in terms of, in the spacing. Will my schedule change? So they'll change in terms of the currently referenced times. That's really something that is going to be based upon, the start time for school. We are planning on going back to our pre-COVID start times so that we have the capacity to run our buses. It would be great to be able to continue to have the same start time and end time for all the schools throughout the district, but we would need basically 3 times as many buses as we have right now.
Okay.
And then can siblings be together? We're making every effort at the building level possible to keep siblings together. So if you're a student at Glenwood or your family at Glenwood, you have a couple of kids, we will keep them together. We're going to make every effort if you have a student up at Central Tree and then a couple at Glenwood to keep those cohorts together as well. Again, we might, and Bob and I talked about this a little earlier, if you have a student at Thomas Prince who's an 8th grader and then a student who's an 11th grader at the high school, and they're taking a one-off class, it's only offered one time and that's the class that they're in and they want to keep it, we can't guarantee we'd be able to keep that student in the same cohort as your 8th grader.
Thank you, Daryl. We got 2 questions left here under teaching and learning. So you've mentioned a lot about this cohort A and they're in for 2 days, and cohort B and they're in for 2 days, and everybody's off on Wednesday. I got a special ed child and I'm wondering, they might need more services than just 2 days in person. Is there any possibility that my student might be in 4 or 5 days a week as opposed to just 2 days?
Yeah, so as we kind of look at bringing our special education students in, they are going to be assigned to a specified cohort. So they will be in either cohort A or cohort B. And again, if we have the opportunity to add more seats to a particular space where those students are located for inclusion classes, we will do that in order to increase the amount of time those students are in school. But, and again, part of this, and this is something that we've spoken with our administrator for special education, Christine Smith. There is a special education plan that's defined for all students associated with this current year. And we want to ensure that we're providing as much support as we possibly can. It's really vital for our students that receive a great deal of special ed services to be in person and get that in-person support on a regular basis.
Thank you. And our last question under teaching and learning. So Daryl, if I sign up, when am I going to know what cohort I'm in for the hybrid here? When's that happening?
So, really families will be notified no later than the 3rd of November. So that's, yes, that's election day, and that's not why we chose it, but that's the day in which, we feel as though we'll be able to have cohorts defined pretty clearly, and we can get those out to families so that you'll be able to know what days your students will be going to school if you choose the hybrid model.
Thank you.
Okay.
Health and safety. All right. So I've heard a lot about classroom windows are going to be open, and how's this going to work, especially with the weather getting a little colder? Are my kids going to be freezing in school? They're going to have to wear coats and mittens in school? Help me to understand this.
So I think that's something that has been shared publicly, not just this district. I'm just saying in general about fresh air, moving air around so that there's enough air exchange per hour in our schools. So one of the things that we've done is that we have our own HVAC person on staff who has been working diligently since early last summer. Going through each and every building, each and every classroom, looking at the systems to ensure the CO2 levels, the airflow works in each one of the schools. We actually have CO2 meters and airflow meters for every single building.
Yep.
So again, our air exchange systems, they are designed when all the dampers are fully open to fully exchange enough air for us to have our students in class safely, our teachers in class safely, with our windows closed. If more circulation is needed, we can definitely have windows open. But most of our systems work well already, and there's no need to do that. The only time that might happen, and we spoke about this today, on a very warm day. So the expectation is tomorrow, I think, or the next day is supposed to be 75 or 70 to 75 degrees. And if the boilers aren't off and that the heat is still coming through the HVAC system, windows could be open just to cool down the room.
Thank you. How's lunch going to work in the buildings? I mean, I've heard all sorts of different things. Can you help me to understand that a little bit?
Sure. So lunch is again, when we're talking about what has to happen in the lunchroom, one of the things that we will be doing, schools will be sharing with you pictures of the cafeteria, what the cafeteria looks like without the cafeteria tables and socially distanced desks all facing the same way. Bob and I were up in the high school a couple of weeks ago, and we walked into the cafeteria where, again, there's still not enough room for us to hold lunch for all the students who need to come through. But that's also the place where we have our study halls, and it's literally a giant study hall for about 136 students, all socially distanced, spaced 6 feet apart from one another. And again, anytime there is the time where a student would be unmasking, that distance is something that's required. So when we're talking about lunch, they're either going to have a prepackaged meal or they're going to bring their lunch. We're not going to be setting up lunches in the traditional way where they would go through and say, okay, I'll take the potatoes instead of the carrots today, and I'll take the roast turkey instead of the vegetarian. It will be a prepackaged meal. They'll be able to choose from a different prepackaged meal, but it'll be ready to go. There are times when some of the schools will have students go into the cafeteria and they will have lunch in the cafeteria. Other times, some of our other schools, they're going to be in classrooms where they will be eating in a classroom. But I can tell you that the desks are set up so that there is enough space between all of them in terms of a distance. And it's 8 feet on center, 6 feet from one edge of a seat to another, and from one end of a desk to the beginning of a seat for those seats, whereby students are able to take their masks off, able to eat safely. They're all facing the same direction, and it's a very I don't think anyone would have thought that education would have gone back in this way, because not that lunch was ever this way, but 20, 30, 40 years ago, I can remember being in school and sitting in a row, looking at the teacher. Everyone is kind of spaced out. It looks a lot like that. It's just there's even more space.
Thank you. Daryl, cleaning of the schools, help us to understand a little bit. Bathrooms in particular, are we changing the way we're doing this now? What are we doing to make sure that these places are safe for students?
Yeah, we really are, Bob. So when we're talking about the daily routines associated with cleaning, one of the things that's happening now is that our custodial staff will be hitting high touch areas all day. So they're going to be moving around, wiping down door handles, door pushes, places where desk common areas where students or staff might touch. They will be going into bathrooms multiple times during the day, cleaning those down. And again, this is all to prevent the spread of COVID in some form or fashion. We're changing the routines in that sense. So ultimately, we want to ensure that we're hitting all those areas. In fact, even in our own office here that's connected to the Early Childhood Center, the morning custodian literally comes through and wipes down the handles. Every morning he's sitting the handles up, spots desk areas and so forth. So it's something that will be on a continual basis.
And I know for a fact that bathrooms will be cleaned multiple times each day, especially after high use times. All right, we can go on to our next question there. So we heard a little bit about what are the custodians going to do. I'm more concerned about my student, Daryl, my kid that's going to school. Tell me about them and washing their hands, and are they going to be doing that more often? Because I'm a little nervous about that.
Yeah, so if you take a look at some of the information that we've put out there on the website about the reopening, it goes into a little more detail about what we're asking students to do and what they're going to be responsible for. But if you jump down to the second paragraph, we talk about students sanitizing their hands. So first and foremost, when they get on the bus, they're going to sanitize. They're going to sit down at their assigned seat that they have on the bus. And when they leave, they're going to sanitize again before they get into school, and that's at arrival. Before and after recess, before and after lunch, any common equipment, and that might be like a basketball or something else that might occur in PE. And before leaving school and getting on the bus. There are going to be multiple times during the day when students are either sanitizing or they're using soap and water to wash their hands on a regular basis. Again, that's something that is, that was something that was stressed over and over again when COVID first started. The singing happy birthday, making sure that kids are washing their hands and so forth. And that was even pre-schools closing. And now, we're at the point where we need to ensure that students and staff are doing this frequently throughout the day. And again, that comes also down to when we're talking about school, and Director Keenan and I were talking about this a little earlier. School will look a little different this year. School's not going to be the same as it typically is. Students would wash their hands during the day, but not this many times. And you have to remember, not only will they have to wash their hands, but in order to do that, they're going to have to socially distance. So the teacher can't line the kids up one after the other after the other. They're going to have to go up, wash their hands at the sink, come back down. The other one's going to have to go up, wash your hands at the sink, come back down. Those are the things that are going to change how school works during the school day. It's going to look different. Lining up for lunch, going into lunch, cleaning up after recess, cleaning up before lunch, all of those types of things. It's just going to look different in the sense that the time consumption will be much greater than it has in the past.
Daryl, you mentioned hand sanitizing. Where is this located? Where's the hand sanitizer located?
Sure. So hand sanitizer, we want to ensure that hand sanitizer just isn't out in a hallway that's not being monitored. So hand sanitizer will be in classrooms or, for example, outside of an office where it's in clear view of an adult. So again, making sure that kids aren't just taking hand sanitizer, using it, doing whatever with it, and it's being monitored by an adult.
Very good. And we do have hand sanitizer in every classroom across the district as well. So whether they have a sink or they don't. Daryl, the next question, can you talk to us a little bit? I've been hearing this deep cleaning is going to happen. What is that, and what's going on in that world?
Sure. So deep cleaning is a kind of term that I think is used differently, and there are different kind of thoughts on what it actually means. But when we look at deep cleaning once a week in our district, that's a time, our Wednesday afternoons where we're looking at providing the opportunity for our custodians to really provide a more thorough cleaning of spaces that are used frequently. And I think I've mentioned this, we purchased portable electronic spray guns that actually disinfect rooms and hallways and so forth that have been, we have those in place. They're being used now in our schools that have students in them, in 11 of the 12 schools. All the custodians know how to use them. They've been using them very consistently. And those will be what we spend more time on during those blocks of time when we have the regular cleaning. Because the other thing that people have to remember is custodians still have to do their end of the night mopping. They still have to do their taking the trash out. All of those things in buildings that are several 100,000 square feet, it takes a lot of time. So again, we have a great custodial staff here. They work so hard. I've been so impressed with everything that they've done just to even get the buildings ready to roll. So when we're looking at what else we can do, we have carpet cleaners that we have brought on board. So, for example, we have Houghton and Choxet. And if any of you have been in Houghton and Choxet, you know that there's probably more carpet there than there is in all of our other schools combined. And, we have a portable carpet cleaner that we're purchasing, an extractor that we'll be using once a week to clean those hallways to take things up. We'll also have that up at the high school and our early childhood center that does have quite a bit of carpeting for that space.
Thank you. And speaking of cleaning and what else, Daryl, on the next question, tell me about what's going to be the expectation for in-class cleaning during the day. Well, what's that expectation?
So when we're talking about what happens in an elementary schools, the students are going to have their own desk for the day. They're really not going to move around from their desk. What we will do is have that cleaned before students come in and at the end of the day. In terms of the upper grade levels where students will switch, even if they're in a cohort, their courses are such that they will not be with that same group of students for all 5 or 6 periods. So what they will do is there will be a wipe down. So we have thousands and thousands and thousands of wipes that will be used in between all of those classes, just to ensure that anything that was on the desk and the seat were able to be wiped down before another student sits down.
Thank you. Daryl, maybe switching gears a little bit. What happens if my kid gets sick while they're at school?
So that's, again, this is a question that comes up quite often in terms of the concern associated with, gosh, if my student all of a sudden has a fever or they have a couple of the symptoms associated with COVID, what's that next step? And what all schools have currently in our district are medical waiting rooms. So if we have a student or an employee that the nurse feels has enough COVID symptoms to really put them into that medical waiting room, the nurse will don their appropriate PPE, escort that student or adult to the medical waiting room where they're actually being monitored. And we will ask parents to come pick up their child as soon as possible. So that's the other really important part of bringing kids back in, having up-to-date emergency contacts. That is vital for us because, again, if there is a student that has any type of symptomology associated with COVID, we want to ensure that they're going to be assessed as soon as possible and not necessarily spread it within the building. So we're looking to ensure that we have all of the up-to-date information that is really needed in order to contact either a relative, a neighbor, someone that has the capacity to take on the emergency role if you're unable to do so. And again, we're really looking at a 30-minute time frame, if at all possible, for that. I know for some people it might not be, but it's really a time frame that we're looking to do. The medical waiting room, and this will be something we'll send some pictures out for the different schools. The medical waiting room is a space that has been designated in each building in order to isolate students or adults from potentially sharing whatever it is they might have, COVID, any type of suspected COVID case.
And Daryl, that room has, as much as possible, has windows. It has a bathroom that's relatively close to it. It's close to the entrance or exit of the building. And it's something where the student will not be left alone. There will be somebody there with the student at all times. Daryl, yep, one more question under this area, and then we'll move a little quicker through the next batch.
Sure, yes.
But tell me about masks. What's acceptable here?
So for students, for the most part, we're looking at masks. So I'll pull out my mask, for example. This is a cotton mask, 2 layers, needs to get washed frequently. And those are fine for students to be wearing to bring in on a daily basis. So when we're looking at, a cloth mask like this one, it does have 2 layers. I have to wash it every night, but I have several, so I kind of group them and wash them all at once. When we're talking about something like a gator mask, which is like a turtleneck that comes up, or a really thin one like a bandana, if again, I see people just wrapping bandanas around their mouths. Those don't cut it. Those aren't going to be allowed. If that is the case and a student comes into school with that, we do have student masks available if a student needs a mask that they can wear as well. The other thing is that you might have seen masks that have valves on them that allow unfiltered air to escape. And again, those are not acceptable for school. And we will ask students not to wear those, and they'll be given a mask that is acceptable.
Thank you, Daryl. So COVID-19 guidelines. When would I be notified, and how would I be notified if a staff member or a student in my child's class is sick?
Sure. So this is, again, as I told you earlier, I meet with all 5 boards of health and our school nurses on a biweekly basis. And, we've been doing this now for a few months. What we would do in any situation where there's, and we'll talk about this a little earlier in terms of a little later, in terms of close contact, the district nursing team, they work directly with the boards of health and DPH around any person who has tested positive or who would be considered a close contact. That person is also someone that's going to be instructed to stay home, self-monitor. If there is a positive case in a school, there will be a notification. But again, one thing that we have to remember is that there are laws that protect the identity of people for any type of reason associated with COVID or the HIPAA laws. So in terms of what goes out there in terms of information, it might just be something as simple as there's been a diagnosed case in the school, and this is what we're doing in order to mitigate any of the issues associated with close contacts and so forth.
And Daryl, maybe you could share the next slide, and that's really the chart that would help parents to make a determination as to whether it was safe for them to send their son or daughter back to school based on what category you'd fall under here. Yeah,
thank you, Bob. And Brendan did a great job pulling this chart together, and we'll post this and also send this out to families. So if you look at that first one, you have symptoms and you test positive for COVID-19. So this is kind of a breakdown. So you have a 10-day isolation period, and you'll be able to return after you've been fever-free and your other symptoms have improved for at least 24 hours. Close contact, and we'll talk about this a little bit earlier. If you're exposed to someone and even if you test negative, you still have to quarantine from 14 days after exposure. For that third,
the next slide I think tells you a little bit about close contact. If you wanted to jump there,
go back there. Sure. Okay. And I'll jump back to the other slide. But what's considered close contact? So close contact is basically if you're within 6 feet or under, close to someone who has been diagnosed with COVID. And that is with a mask or without a mask. It's for if you're providing care at home, if it's in your school, direct physical contact with a person that has COVID, even sharing sharing utensils or drinking utensils. Those are things that would be considered close contact. And then that ties back to this column where you have to quarantine, even if it comes back negative. So COVID-19 symptoms diagnosis, alternative diagnosis, again, the student or staff may return based on the recommendations of the provider. That is something that that conversation will also occur between a parent, a staff member, and the school nurse. COVID-19 symptoms and negative COVID test results. So the individual may return as soon as they are fever-free and without any other kind of symptoms after 24 hours. And then finally, COVID-19 symptoms, but not tested. So they may return 10 days after the start of symptoms if symptoms have improved, and they're fever-free 24 hours without fever reducing medication. And again, that's giving a baby Tylenol or a baby aspirin to a student in order to reduce that. We're not looking for people to do that because again, if that does occur and they still are contagious and they go back into school, that's where we're going to run into problems as a district where we could have a breakout.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll jump over this one.
Jump over that one. So Daryl, what happens if we got to close the district? Well, how does that all work? What's the story there?
Yeah, so if we ran into a situation associated with a really heavy spike in cases over a few weeks, again, the way that it's now being broken down by the state, so the governor's task force has put together a color-coded way in which to determine numbers of positive cases per 100,000. And when we're looking at that, red is the overall number. That's a group that is kind of a warning group. Yellow is the next level, green's the next level, and gray/white is the level that there's no concern about because really basically not a lot of cases. So when we are working with our local departments of public health and we're looking at what our numbers are in reference to the 5 towns, we have to take into consideration the fact that Holden is the largest community out of our 5 towns, and it basically encompasses about 50%. It comprises 50% of the district in terms of the number of students. So the state DESE has said that any district, they've designated Holden because Holden's the largest town as the basically the COVID case count community that we should follow if there's necessary steps to be taken based upon that color coding and the trajectory of the COVID-19.
Thank you, Daryl. Daryl, we've kind of answered the next slide. I know we're running out of time here, so let's jump one slide ahead of that, which I think parents would be more interested in here. Tell me about if I travel out of the state, can I come back to school? Do I have to quarantine? What's going on there?
So yeah, that's a great question, especially now that we have the holidays coming up. So what we've done is that we've linked the COVID-19 travel order details to this, as well as the U.S. Department of State international travel details associated with travel outside of Massachusetts and also outside of the country. So if you take a look at this slide, this is a slide from the CDC, and it shows the states that are restricted based upon Massachusetts and traveling to and from. And then the states, so all the red states are the restricted states, the white states are the states that are lower risk states. So you can see most of the New England states, with the exception of Rhode Island, New York and New Jersey, those are all considered to be okay. And if you were flying across country to Washington State or California or Hawaii, the restricted states are the states where you need to then take on the responsibility associated with getting a test within 72 hours of returning to your workplace or school. And that's all laid out in the state information that's on that link.
Thank you.
Right there. Okay.
Yep. And I think this kind of talks about what you just mentioned. So maybe we'll jump into technology here in our last 10 minutes or so.
Sure. Yeah, and thank you for keeping my timing there. So
Sure.
Where do I get technology support, Bob? Again, those are we have a great IT support department here. Barry Sklar and his crew have done a fantastic job. If you have need of a device, if there's if your device isn't working anymore, whatever it might be, parents can still request a Chromebook by going through the link up above shared in this slide. Internet access, we also have the capacity to help families with that, as we have purchased several like 50 hotspots ultimately for families to use. Any general tech support that might be needed, we have a form that's linked here, as well as more about how we can use digital tools, how families can access some of the tools that we have in the Technology Help Center.
Perfect. Daryl, on the next slide, it's a little question around what are we doing for online platforms? How's this working here?
Sure. So we have all of our remote classes are all being used. They're all using common learning management platforms. So all educators in grades pre-K through 2 use Seesaw. And then all of our other grade levels 3 through 12 use Google Classroom. So earlier this fall, the district purchased the Google G Suite, which had many more features than the original Google platform that we have had over the past several years. So that's one that has hand raising, breakout rooms, question and answers. You have the ability to take a poll now. So all of these are similar to what Zoom had out there in the past. And it was well worth the investment to put forth this type of effort into purchasing the G Suite Enterprise. So Barry has been a big advocate of this over the past several years, and this is really helpful for teaching and learning to occur in the remote world.
And ultimately, we did write a grant that paid for that. So I agree with you. That was well worth it.
It was.
So under routines. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Yeah. Go ahead.
Go right ahead here. I skipped a slide on you.
Don't worry. Go ahead.
Tell me about using devices when I'm in school. Am I supposed to bring something home into school from home?
Yeah. So right now, I can tell you that we still have many devices on order, as probably every school district does in the country. I'm hearing about some school districts that ordered literally 30,000 Chromebooks, and they are nowhere in sight. So we have a few thousand Chromebooks that are on order right now. They were ordered back the end of June, maybe even early June. And of course, they're promised to you, you're going to get it in the next shipment. You're going to get it in the next shipment. Well, that's happening everywhere. The next shipment isn't coming in now until sometime in November. So we've actually taken Chromebook carts and shared Chromebook carts, or the Chromebooks from those carts, with our students that need access to technology at home in order to promote remote learning and have it work for all of them. So at the high school level, those students already have Chromebooks. The expectation is they're going to come to school with their Chromebook if they come in for hybrid and bring it back home. At the middle level, what we're going to do is we're going to have teachers kind of share that information once hybrid begins, and we'll take a look at how that might happen. And then at the elementary level, what we'll do is, if the students are in school, we will provide those devices if necessary. So as we've kind of talked about this as a district, I think 3 years ago now, we started the high school one-to-one program. Our goal is to allow students this year, we have enough Chromebooks to have all of our 6 through 12 have a Chromebook that can come back and forth as their Chromebook for the year. And again, we'll be looking at bringing that model down as time goes by.
And could you just mention something about our goal about limiting screen time as well, Daryl?
Yeah, and again, this is something that we always want to ensure that we're keeping an eye on, is just how much time a student's actually in front of a screen on a daily basis. And I think I mentioned this a little earlier, during those remote days and even days when students might be in person, we're still promoting teachers having students use packets, paper, pencil, things where they're not necessarily on a screen straining their eyes for 4, 5, 6 hours a day. Because again, we already know students have screen time outside of school to begin with, so we don't want to burden them too much with that.
Perfect.
Thanks for bringing that up.
We'll spend about 30 seconds or so on our last 5 slides. So the first one here is, can you tell me a little bit about the start and stop times for each building?
So right now, as of today, the start and end times of the schools look like this. It's very similar to what we had last year, and the pre-COVID timeframes. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. Can the kids all go at the same days? Can they go on the same days?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about that earlier. Cohorts. We're doing everything we can to ensure that we have students from the same family in the same cohorts, because I know that's a challenge in and of itself to have one child going Monday, Tuesday, another child going Thursday, Friday. So we're going to do everything in our power to keep those students together.
Daryl, tell me about lunch. Is it free? Is it not? How's this work? Do I have to purchase lunch?
Yeah. So, This was something that was, the federal government has extended the meal program so that all meals are free to students through the end of the school year 2021. So there's really no need for students to purchase anything unless they want to only buy milk or they want an a la carte snack item. And one of the things that our director of food service, Margaret Barton, just wants parents to really understand, please, if you can use the My School Bucks online prepayment or pay by check to fund a student account, that would be beneficial because then we don't have students handing money over, and there isn't as much interaction between students and staff in terms of the touching of those items.
Perfect. Daryl, talk to us a little bit about bathroom breaks. Is that's still happening? Can that happen? And what about mask breaks, those types of things?
Yeah, so things like bathroom breaks, mask breaks, snack breaks. Gosh, I never thought I'd be talking about a mask break, but one of the things we have to remember is that students need the time to take a break from wearing their mask when they're in their classroom. So mask breaks will be offered up in all of the schools. Bathroom breaks, the bathroom breaks will occur, but again, we'll have to work on how that works, and it's going to look different from building to building, maybe even grade level to grade level and school to school. Same with snack breaks. Much of that is based upon the individualized model associated with the classroom. So it might look different in a first grade at one school versus a third grade in the same school.
Thank you. And Daryl, my only question under logistics, as a parent, I appreciate the communication. I appreciate you answering all these questions. How do we make this work in the future? Because I'd rather find out information from you firsthand than secondhand from another source.
Yeah. So again, I think this is what we're trying to do right now. Trying to take care of a lot of the angst associated with what parents are dealing with, what students are dealing with in terms of the changing kind of layout of what education looks like this year. So when we're talking about what we can do through a town hall, I feel as though this gives us the opportunity to talk through some items rather than me calling someone individually or trying to respond to every email. This gives us the opportunity to group some things together so that people can have some kind of information that allows them to make some decisions. I can tell you that more communication will be coming out from us on a weekly basis from the central office level. And schools will be sharing individualized plans where you will have more information pertaining to your school in particular versus me talking about it from a 40,000-foot level. And that should be coming out within the week.
And Daryl, we could remind people maybe, there you go on this slide, about how to get us information. And maybe you could remind folks about what we're looking to get information back from them on the survey about making a choice here.
Yeah, sure. So again, we've, the remote hybrid kind of conversation has been going on for a little while now, and we have a date of next Tuesday, the 27th, as a time when we want you to go into Power School. That has been shared with you in an email, school messenger that I put out the other day to families to go in there and really choose that hybrid model. Because again, what we have to do is look at our transportation and the capacity of us to bring our kids back and forth to school. Because as I said earlier, our buses now have the capacity to bring in basically a third of the students on a daily basis. So we need to just ensure that we have the ability to do that regularly. I also know that there were a couple questions, and these came up during this time, around snow days. What would snow days look like? There won't be true snow days this year, which is good. I'll still have to get up early and talk with our DPWs and so forth. But when we would have a day when an A cohort might come in, if we have a snow day, that day just becomes remote for the entire district. I do know this is only going to be for this year. The commissioner has said he's going to allow it through the end of June, and then next year it's going to go back to the old model of getting the call in the morning and you have to make up the days. So, in terms of the feedback at WRSD.net, please feel free to send more questions in. We'll be going through another town hall tomorrow morning from 9:30 to 11. We'll do our best to attempt to answer more of these questions that are coming through, but please know that we appreciate the questions. If there's anything else that we can do to help you out in terms of making those decisions, that's what we're attempting to do through this venue. So with that being said, I just wanted to thank you all. I do know it's 4 o'clock, and I think I know people are probably tired of hearing me talk, and I appreciate you taking time to watch us. This will get posted online, so you'll be able to go to WRSD.net, find the link for this. You'll also be able to find the link for the slideshow that was shared with all of those embedded links associated with CDC, DPH, and many of the other items that we're looking at. Brendan and Bob, any final comments?
I'd just like to assure parents that we will be working through those emails that you're sending in to answer those individually as well.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate you taking time to participate in this, to watch this, and I'm hopeful that we continue to move forward with helping our kids out as best we can. And I appreciate all of your patience, and I appreciate all of your support during this entire pandemic, and really looking at education a little differently than we ever thought we'd have to. So thank you very much, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.